The marble floors of the Colosseum are stained crimson beneath your feet as you stand in the shadow of the imperial box. Above you, draped in purple silk and crowned with laurel leaves made of solid gold, sits a man whose very presence seems to poison the air around him. His eyes scan the arena floor with the cold calculation of a predator selecting prey, and when he smiles, even his most loyal senators recoil in barely concealed horror. The year is 37 AD, and you are witnessing the reign of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known to history as Caligula, the most depraved and terrifying emperor Rome ever produced. The crowd roars as gladiators clash below, but their cheers turn to gasps of horror when the emperor raises his jeweled hand. What happens next will haunt your nightmares for the rest of your life, because this is not entertainment. This is systematic cruelty elevated to an art form. The man who rules the known world is about to demonstrate why his own people whisper that he is not human, but something far more monstrous wearing the mask of divinity. Before diving into these forgotten stories of absolute power corrupted beyond recognition, if you enjoy learning about the darkest chapters of human history, consider hitting that subscribe button and letting me know in the comments where you're watching from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient horrors together from different corners of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with the depths of human cruelty and the price of unchecked authority. But to understand the monster that Caligula became, we must first examine the poison that created him. Born into the most powerful family in Rome, young Gaius was raised in military camps along the Rhine frontier, where hardened legionnaires nicknamed him Caligula, meaning little boot, after the miniature soldier's sandals his mother dressed him in. These same soldiers who found his childhood antics amusing would later pray for deliverance from the nightmare he unleashed upon the world. The seeds of madness were planted early in soil already saturated with blood and betrayal. Caligula's father, Germanicus, was Rome's most beloved general, a man whose popularity threatened the paranoid Emperor Tiberius. When Germanicus died under mysterious circumstances, whispers of poison spread through the capital like wildfire. His widow, Agrippina, openly accused Tiberius of murder, an accusation that would cost her everything. Young Caligula watched as his mother was exiled to a barren island where she would starve herself to death rather than submit to imperial tyranny. His brothers met even worse fates, tortured and executed on trumped-up charges of treason. By the age of 20, Caligula had witnessed the systematic destruction of his entire family, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a burning hatred for the world that had stolen everything he loved. When Tiberius finally summoned him to the island of Capri, the young man who arrived was no longer the laughing child the legions had adored. He had learned to wear masks, to smile while plotting revenge, to hide his true nature behind a facade of obedience and charm. The aging Tiberius, perhaps recognizing a kindred darkness in his great nephew, kept Caligula close during his final years. On that cursed island, surrounded by the emperor's collection of perverted pleasures and unspeakable cruelties, Caligula received his true education in the art of absolute power. He learned that human life was worthless, that suffering was entertainment, and that fear was the only currency that truly mattered in the corridors of power. When Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, some claimed that Caligula had smothered the old tyrant with his own hands, though others insisted he had simply watched with cold satisfaction as pneumonia claimed his tormentor. Either way, the Senate and people of Rome welcomed their new emperor with desperate relief, believing that anyone would be better than the paranoid recluse who had terrorized them for decades. How wrong they were. The first months of Caligula's reign seemed to confirm their hopes. He recalled political exiles, distributed generous bonuses to the Praetorian Guard, and staged magnificent gladiatorial games that reminded Romans of their city's former glory. The young emperor appeared in public frequently, charming crowds with his wit and apparent generosity. Citizens who had lived in fear under Tiberius dared to hope that their nightmare was finally over. but those who looked closely noticed disturbing signs beneath the golden facade. Caligula's eyes held a peculiar intensity that made even seasoned politicians uncomfortable. His laughter came too easily and lasted too long. Most unsettling of all were the moments when his mask would slip, revealing glimpses of something cold and alien lurking behind his boyish features. The transformation began gradually, like poison seeping through marble. At first, it was merely excessive spending on games and spectacles that drained the imperial treasury. Then came the bizarre pronouncements, the claims of divine ancestry, the insistence that senators prostrate themselves in his presence like conquered barbarians. Citizens who had cheered his generosity watched in growing alarm as their beloved young emperor revealed appetites that defied comprehension. The turning point came during a severe illness that struck Caligula in his 8th month as emperor. For days, he lay delirious with fever while the entire empire held its breath, praying for his recovery. When he finally emerged from his sickbed, those closest to him swore that something fundamental had changed. The man who had entered that room was not the same being who emerged from it. What followed was a descent into madness so complete and horrifying that even Rome's blood-soaked history offered no precedent for the atrocities that were about to unfold. The emperor who had once charmed senators with his eloquence now spoke only in riddles and threats. The ruler who had distributed gold to the masses began demanding worship as a living god. Most terrifying of all, the man who had seemed to value human life began to view it as nothing more than raw material for his increasingly twisted entertainments. The first signs of his true nature emerged during what should have been routine gladiatorial contests, where previous emperors had been content to watch trained fighters battle according to established rules. Caligula demanded innovations that transformed sport into systematic torture. He ordered fights between fathers and sons, forcing parents to choose between killing their children or watching them die slowly. He matched cripples against wild animals, laughing as the crowd recoiled in disgust at spectacles that violated every principle of Roman honor. But these were merely rehearsals for the horrors that would follow, warm-up acts for a reign of terror that would make his predecessors seem like benevolent shepherds by comparison. The arena floor becomes his canvas for experiments in cruelty that stretch the boundaries of human imagination. Caligula's twisted genius lies not just in the brutality of his acts, but in their calculated psychological impact on both victims and witnesses. He understands that true terror comes not from random violence, but from the methodical destruction of everything people hold sacred. His first innovation involves the sacred bond between parent and child. Roman society, built on the foundation of family loyalty and paternal authority, watches in paralyzed horror as their emperor forces mothers to watch their infants torn apart by starving lions. But Caligula's cruelty extends beyond mere murder. He positions the imperial box at the perfect angle to capture every expression of maternal anguish, studying the faces of grieving women like a scholar examining rare manuscripts. The emperor develops an elaborate system for selecting victims that reveals the mathematical precision of his madness. Children are chosen not randomly, but according to criteria that maximize suffering. He prefers infants old enough to recognize their parents, young enough to scream in pure terror, beautiful enough that their destruction feels like a personal assault on anyone watching. The selection process becomes a perverse art form, with Caligula spending hours examining potential victims like a connoisseur choosing wine. What makes these spectacles even more horrifying is the emperor's insistence that they be treated as religious ceremonies. He declares that watching children die is a form of worship, that the screams of innocence are prayers offered to his divine essence. Citizens who attempt to leave during these obscene exhibitions are arrested for impiety. Their own families dragged to the arena floor as punishment for their lack of devotion to their god-emperor. The psychological warfare extends beyond the arena into every corner of Roman society. Caligula institutes dinner parties where guests are forced to bring their children, never knowing whether the evening will end with conversation or infanticide. Senators arrive at these gatherings with their families in tow, spending entire meals watching their emperor's face for signs of his intentions, reading omens in his every gesture and word. The emperor's palace becomes a house of horrors where the normal rules of human behavior cease to exist. Corridors, once filled with dignified political discourse, now echo with the screams of children and the sobs of parents forced to participate in their own offspring's destruction. Caligula orders nurseries built within the imperial residence, not to house royal heirs, but to provide a steady supply of victims for his increasingly elaborate tortures. His methods evolve with each passing month, growing more sophisticated and psychologically devastating. He begins forcing parents to participate directly in their children's deaths, promising mercy that never comes, offering false hopes that make the final betrayals even more crushing. Some mothers are told that if they can remain silent while their babies are devoured, their other children will be spared. Others are given weapons and ordered to kill their own infants quickly to save them from slower deaths. The emperor's fascination with infant mortality extends beyond simple sadism into realms of philosophical inquiry that reveal the depths of his intellectual corruption. He conducts experiments to determine how long newborns can survive various forms of torture, keeping detailed records of their responses to different stimuli. These documents, discovered centuries later by horrified historians, read like medical journals written by a demon wearing human skin. Caligula's reign transforms Rome from a civilization into a charnel house, where the most basic human instincts are weaponized against the population. Parents begin abandoning their children rather than risk bringing them to imperial attention. Birth rates plummet as couples choose childlessness over the possibility of watching their offspring become entertainment for a madman. The very foundations of Roman society begin to crumble under the weight of systematic terror. The emperor's appetite for infant sacrifice grows with each feeding, like a disease that strengthens itself by consuming healthy tissue. He orders the construction of specialized amphitheaters designed specifically for child murder, complete with viewing galleries positioned to provide optimal sight lines for the imperial box. These architectural marvels become monuments to human depravity, their marble columns carved with scenes of children being devoured by wild beasts. Foreign ambassadors arriving in Rome find themselves witnessing horrors that challenge their ability to maintain diplomatic composure. Egyptian envoys, accustomed to their own pharaoh's divine pretensions, flee the capital after watching Caligula feed a delegation of Gallic children to trained bears while discussing trade agreements. Germanic chieftains, hardened by generations of tribal warfare, vomit openly at spectacles that make their bloodiest battles seem like gentle sports. The emperor's madness reaches its apex when he declares that all Roman children belong to him by divine right, transforming parenthood from a natural relationship into a temporary stewardship that can be revoked at any moment. Families across the empire live in constant terror, knowing that a summons to the capital might mean watching their children become sacrifices to their ruler's insatiable appetite for suffering. Yet even in this landscape of unimaginable horror, the most chilling aspect of Caligula's reign is not the scale of his cruelties, but the methodical intelligence behind them. This is not the random violence of a common criminal, but the calculated campaign of a brilliant mind turned completely toward evil. Every scream has been orchestrated, every tear has been planned, every moment of agony has been designed to serve his greater purpose of transforming Rome from a republic into a temple dedicated to the worship of human suffering. The Reign of Terror finally ended on January 24th, 41st AD, when Caligula's own Praetorian Guard, led by Cassius Chaerea, cornered the mad emperor in the underground corridors beneath his palace. The man who had proclaimed himself a living god died like any mortal, bleeding out on cold stone, while his killers methodically butchered his wife and infant daughter to prevent any continuation of his cursed bloodline. Rome's nightmare was over, but the scars would never fully heal. In just 4 years, Caligula had transformed the mightiest empire on earth into a monument to human depravity, proving that absolute power doesn't simply corrupt, it can utterly destroy the very essence of humanity itself. His legacy serves as an eternal warning about what happens when we allow monsters to wear crowns, when we mistake charm for character, and when we forget that even emperors are merely men, capable of becoming something far worse than any beast that prowls the wilderness. The children's screams that once echoed through the Colosseum have long since faded into silence, but their memory haunts us still, reminding us that civilization is nothing more than a thin veneer over the abyss of human cruelty. In our own age of rising authoritarianism and cult of personality politics, perhaps we should remember little Caligula and ask ourselves what monsters we might be creating in our own time.